All right, everybody, welcome back to Hawks Huddle. We have a very special guest today. I'm sure you've all seen him on your TV screen. We got Steve Wyche here with us today. Steve is an NFL Network reporter. He is a host of the Huddle and Flow podcast along with Jim Trotter, and you can follow him on Twitter at Wyche89. So thanks for coming on, Steve. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, man. I appreciate you guys reaching out. This is going to be great.
Of course. No, we're very excited. We've kind of been planning this for a while now. You're for sure someone that we've wanted on because we're such big football fans. Also, we're in the media, or trying to at least. But I gotta ask you first, do you ever get bored of talking about football all day, every day?
Never.
Never.
Because I don't. Because I don't. There's the pockets where I talk about it, but then once we don't. And when I have friends by, a lot of them are like, do you mind if we talk football? Like, no, fire away, man. Because
Okay.
I've got access. I do something that a lot of people would kill to do. Like every day I wake up and say 50 million people want my job.
Right.
So
Yeah.
talk a little football. I mean, you're not asking me to like pull a car up a hill, right? So
Right.
yeah, we can chat. So it's all good.
That's great. Like, what would you say is the best part of your job and the worst part of your job? Because I know it seems great all the time, but there's got to be some things that you can't stand sometimes.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'm glad you did is you clarified, you know, that it's a job. And I tell people this, I grew up raised by my mother, outside, I lived in Minneapolis and outside of St. Louis, and we're hard work, Midwesterners. Hard work is just kind of what we do. And there's a difference between work and a job. And I want everyone to understand that, right? So what I have is a
Right.
job. I do not work. And so,
Right.
the best part is clearly the people,
Hmm.
the people you meet, the people you have relationships with, the people you watch grow, the people who watch you grow, the people you work with. Like an NFL Network, our group of reporters. I mean, we are super tight. Me and Mike Giardi and Stacey Dales and James Palmer and Mike Silver and Jim Trotter. I mean, we are like brothers and sisters. So it's really cool um, to work at a place where everybody is just so connected and moving, on the same page. The worst part of the job, absolutely, is some of the time elements away from what you would like to do. I've got three kids; they're grown now, but still, there's just a lot of their lives that I missed if I was on a trip or
Right.
something like that. So you do what you can, but I think that's with any job because there's no such thing as a true 9 to 5. So
Right.
it is what it is, and you do the best you can.
Yeah, and Steve, you talked about your NFL Network colleagues and how connected you guys are. This past year, for all of you guys, it was quite a different year, of course. I just kind of wanted to get, and I saw you, Steve, out there in Tampa covering the Super Bowl. I just kind of wanted to get a sense on how different this year was with the empty stadiums and the first responders at the Super Bowl. Just kind of how different it all was with you down on the sidelines.
It was as different as could possibly be. I mean, the hardest part is what we do. You heard me talk about building relationships and meeting people, right? So you do that in locker rooms. You do that walking off the field with an assistant coach, who doesn't get talked to often by the media, or players, because there's a human element. You talk to someone like, hey, I saw you at a car show, doing something at a car show. So you can just talk about that. You can just really, and we couldn't do that this year
Right.
because everything was virtual. So the teams decided who was going to speak on certain days. So there might be a lot of guys you never got to speak to, that right tackle, or that weak side linebacker that you never got to speak to, that normally if you could work a locker room you could speak to. And that's a strength of mine. If I show up at a practice at the Seahawks or the Chiefs or whatever, just walking around a locker room, introducing myself to people, having conversations about whatever, and that's how you build trust and relationships. So that was hard. And then just first off, the whole technological aspect of it, when you're
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
something from a home studio, to a studio, to as a remote, report. Like, I think I only traveled 3 times this year, maybe four, just because of COVID. We didn't want
Yeah.
anybody going someplace getting sick and having to quarantine in a
Right.
hotel for 10 days or something. So that part was different. And then the empty stadiums was just bizarre. I mean, I can't give these teams, these players and coaches enough credit
Yeah.
for keeping full 4 quarters worth of focus and energy the way they did. Yeah, there's music between plays, but when those plays are on, it is seriously, hey, we're playing in a parking lot. So the fact that these
Yeah.
guys are such total pros across the board, um, doing what they do to entertain us, salute to what these guys had to go through and what the NFL and NFLPA did to pull off a season. Yeah, they had to juggle the schedules a little bit like they did, but to pull that off was great. But yeah, for us, it was really tough. And I'm just really hoping it's not tough. It was different. And so I'm just really hoping we can kind of get back and have some more of the personal face-to-face interactions where you can see some of the good stories and come up with unique angles that you just couldn't get because you just didn't have the ability to really access things to storytell.
Right.
Of course, yeah. And to your point, Steve, credit to the NFL, and I'm sure when you talk to Smith later on your podcast, I'm sure you'll get into that. Credit to the NFL for the way that they did finish out this season. To your point.
So growing up, what did you see as your career? Because you played football in high school, right? And then you were a bench player in college. Is that right?
Yeah, I was on the team at the University of Missouri for a couple of years, and then I transferred out after 2 years. But I mean, what got me interested? I mean, I was always an athlete. Even as a little kid, um, I was terrible at math. When
Yeah.
it came, okay, when you're doing addition and subtraction and division and multiplication, I'm okay. But the second I've got to answer a word problem, I'm gone. My
Oh yeah,
mind is
me too.
not. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. So I was like,
Ye-
I cannot have a career in anything that really deals with me having to manipulate numbers in a certain way.
Right.
Right.
So I always enjoyed, history and social studies and English and writing. I mean, I was so because I was a big reader.
Right.
Um, and plus, my father was worked in the sales department of the NBC television affiliate in St. Louis. So I was always around the media aspect of it. And then to boot, watching Bryant Gumbel and Irv Cross, the only two black sportscasters doing the NFL and a lot of other things, I was like, I want to be like them. And so I'm living the dream because I'm one of the few people who, from the time they were a little kid to now, is doing what I've always wanted to do. A lot of people want to do
Right.
something, but then meander because life just takes them in that direction. So I count myself to be one of the few fortunate ones to really be able to follow a career path I've always wanted to do.
Right. So NFL was never in your dreams really? It was always just
To
this?
play?
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh
to
no,
to
yeah,
play.
no, I no, I absolutely wanted to play.
You did.
See, I never knew I was good enough, right? It was like one of these
Right.
things in like 11th grade of high school. I'm starting to get all these recruiting letters from University of Missouri and Kansas, and because I grew up in the Midwest, and I'm like, wow, I didn't
Right.
realize I was that good enough. And then I put on 20 pounds over a summer one year and really started to look like a college football player. Um, but I was always a quarterback, and then I got hurt in my 11th grade year. I hurt my throwing shoulder. They put me on defense at a position I never played before, and it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. But when I got to college, I was playing outside linebacker with a quarterback's mentality, and that
Right.
didn't didn't quite mesh for the position I had to play.
Right. Steve, I do want to move on here just a little bit. And you kind of touched on it here when you spoke about Herb Cross there. In your years of always being on the NFL Network, you've done a great job of showcasing the minorities or African Americans in the NFL. Another coaching carousel has gone by, and Eric Bieniemy still is with the Chiefs. Only two non-white coaches were hired in Robert Salah and David Culley. What kind of do you think the NFL needs to do to increase that? I mean, there already is the Rooney Rule. They've tried to make some tweaks to that. What do you see, Steve, as kind of a partial solution?
Send a lot of these owners to some type of non-biased thinking training. It's all about changing mentality. It has nothing to
Right.
do with the NFL. The NFL itself has put in so many things to try to almost force owners. Like, look, stop being this way. It is up to the owners and the people
Yeah.
doing the hiring. And a lot of times, though, like when these teams use search firms, it's like 5 white guys at the search firm,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
even if they recommend candidates to get people to interview, people of color with intentions of giving them a fair shot is a hard thing to do. I mean, you think about teams will fire a coach saying, we want to get this specific guy. Now they have to go through the Rooney rule and all that, but their eye is still on that
Yeah.
specific guy. And I think this year you saw more and more teams keep an open mind. I knew Detroit really liked Dan Campbell from the outset, but they hire Brad Holmes, the head of the Rams
Right.
college scouting department, who wasn't even on top of the list right there. So I think teams kept more and more of an open mind, but it's just going to continue just beating people over the head, saying just hire the best guy instead of just interviewing someone you read about or someone who's from someone's coaching tree. Hire the best guy, because that best guy may be a Polynesian coach or an Indian coach or a black coach, whatever. But give them the opportunity, and too many times they're just not being included with intention in the overall process.
Right.
And sort of piggybacking on that, Steve, I didn't want to go this interview without asking you about my team. As you mentioned, they've already got into some hot water with the Chris Doyle hiring and that whole situation.
Yep.
And like you said, that's why it is so important to hire the right guy. In the grand scheme of things, though, how do you think Urban is going to work out with the Jaguars?
Well, look, he's got a clean slate. I mean, this is one where he can really shape the team how he wants to shape it. He's got a new general manager with Trent Baalke coming in. They can work in unison. They've got the first overall pick. They've got a roster that needs to be completely retooled. There are no immediate expectations.
Right.
So if they get Trevor Lawrence, they've got I think they're picking 23, 24 as well, something like that.
Yep.
And they've got the high picks in the other rounds, and they've got free agent money. But to me, this is a team you can't go out and say, okay, let's go sign Juju Smith-Schuster and this top free agent, this top free agent. Build with a plan and a process. If you're going to sign a free agent, make sure it's a young guy who's going to be there 3 years from now as this thing really starts to blossom, instead of someone who might get you to 8-8 this year. So I just think Urban, we'll see. We'll see how this is going to click. The NFL is different from college football, but Urban has turned things around. And the one thing I found in all my years of covering pro sports, NFL, NBA, is people who can turn around programs quickly, like Urban has at Utah and
Yeah.
Florida and these places. They tend to have a formula that works on both levels. So I think it's going to work. I think he's got an ownership group in Shad Khan and Tony Khan that will support him. So again, we'll see to see if they draft the right players who will respond to his type of coaching and leadership.
I want to go back a little bit to your life. So you earned a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism in 1989, right?
Yep,
And
I'm old.
no. And then your next move was high school and small college sports, right? And then after that, was it right to Atlanta?
No, so okay, so what I did is right out of college, I worked in Richmond, Virginia for almost 2 years, covering mainly high school sports and small college sports like William and Mary,
Mm.
schools like that. And then I went down to Miami, where I started off covering high school sports, and then University of Florida football when they Steve Spurrier and all that great offense just happened. The University of Miami football, and then I really blew up kind of nationally doing boxing. Right, I had an editor
Oh.
there. I was a longtime writer. I had an editor there who was a big boxing fan. Him and I used to talk boxing all the time. She's like, "Why don't you write a boxing column?" And next thing I know, I'm going to Vegas and I'm covering all these Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield fights and things
Oh,
like
wow.
that. So that really got me the exposure to big time, big audience, high profile stuff. And then in between that, I was the backup writer for the Miami Dolphins. And then our Miami Heat writer left. So I ended up covering the Miami Heat in 1997. And then, so as an NBA guy, went to Washington, to the
Okay.
Washington Post, where I covered the NBA. Until 2004, broke the story about Michael Jordan coming to play for Washington. Well, first coming to be a part owner with Washington and then play. And then 2004, I went to Atlanta, where I covered University of Georgia football for a season. And then I went on to the NFL with the Falcons to cover covering them, and then joined the NFL Network in 2008.
Oh wow, what a journey.
Yeah, a lot of journey, and that goes
Yeah.
back to what I said. All the time away from my
So
kids.
yeah, you're
Yeah,
going
there's a lot in there.
everywhere.
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Wow. I want to talk about the Colin Kaepernick story. So, would you say that's like one of the biggest stories, at least ever in sports?
Yes,
It is.
undoubtedly, we're still talking about it.
We're still, and I think I think it's more important now than it was like even
Yeah.
or it was then. But I think people like just didn't understand it as much as it is now. Like whenever I see someone kneeling, I think it's normal now. Then it was like people just couldn't believe it. And but do you think Colin Kaepernick deserves to be on a team? Because I do. I think he's better than most backups in the league right now. Do you think he deserves to be on a team?
He does. He does. I mean, and if he wants to really do it, I think he deserves an opportunity, especially when we're seeing all these teams that need quarterbacks now. I just think the ship has sailed on both sides. I don't think teams they've had plenty of opportunities to sign him. Plus, I think Cap has also moved on with a lot of
Mm,
his business ventures now. I think he's doing a
yeah.
project with Netflix
Yeah.
and
Okay.
things like that. So I think he understands now that he's better served doing what he wants to do outside of the NFL.
Right.
And the NFL realizes finally
Yeah.
that Colin Kaepernick wasn't just not standing for the national anthem. He was doing it in protest of police brutality, which is now something the NFL and most of the world understands after seeing what happened last summer with Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd
Yes.
and all of the others. The same things which were happening in 2016 when Colin Kaepernick first took a knee.
Right.
Um, but now it seems to have gathered our attention because we were all home from COVID, locked into seeing this without any other distractions to take our attention away from it.
Right. And then so when you did break that story, like what did you think was going to happen in the league, like breaking that kind of story?
Well, in terms of football wise, I mean, I knew this was going to bring a whole lot of heat on Cap, and we talked about that off the record. Like, look, man, in the United States, if anybody supposedly treads on the flag, um, it triggers people like we saw. I mean, a lot of people hold that flag as very sanctimonious and um, not sanctimonious, but they're very sacred. And the fact that he didn't recognize it, would a lot of people view that as a sign of disrespect. A lot of other people view that as a sign of strength and courage by him. And, again, the reaction
Yeah.
is kind of what we expected. Did not expect him to be shut out of the league because he was good. People
Yeah.
forget, man, Cap 2 years earlier was probably one of the top three biggest superstars in the NFL.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cover-
they went
Yeah.
to the Super Bowl and it was in
yeah,
that
I mean, he was on
yeah.
the cover of every magazine. He was had all this going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I kind of expected it, but not to the lengths that it is now. And but I did expect the resistance from owners. Who listen to their sponsors and fans more than they listen to Cap and what people were saying was going on in society. Again, we see now 4 and 5 years later, it is flipped.
Yeah.
Um, and let's just hope that momentum in a positive way keeps going.
Yeah, and I think that goes exactly to your point, Steve. Yeah, it's the owners and of course Goodell making that statement in the summer, all of them kind of coming around and using that platform, which you had spoke about 4 years ago when you broke the story on Kaepernick. I know we're gonna pretty much end this very very shortly, Steve. I just kind of have one question for you. Some advice kind of you would give. We talked about all of your journeys with Washington and Atlanta and NFL Network. What is some advice you would give to aspiring reporters such as Jacqueline and I, who are trying to kind of get that breakthrough? I know it was boxing for you, but to get that breakthrough.
Well, first, I keep doing what you're doing. Like when you reached out to me, um, keep on making these connections because now I'm like, okay, great. You guys are fantastic. You're asking well researched and well thought out
Thank you.
questions. Your flow is really good, right? So
Thank you.
keep on working on it. Keep on reaching out. Hit up my colleagues, hit up people at
Yeah.
ESPN, and maybe not just sports folks to talk about.
Right.
And keep on pushing that envelope. But a couple of the biggest things is really don't be afraid to establish relationships with people who are different. When I say different, I'm not just talking about ethnically or racially, whatever. Like age wise. Like the biggest thing to me when I was young was sitting in a newsroom and there's people going through divorces or going through like real life stuff that hadn't impacted me yet. And so how to navigate that, and not just in my newsroom, but people I'm covering and things like that. So, and that's part of the natural growth we have as humans. But really try to listen to people and put yourself in their shoes because it'll help with your coverage, with your lines of questioning
Yeah.
and things like that. When you're well rounded, it really helps. And also, even for sports people, like as much as I'm immersed in sports, I watch news. And I don't just watch what's being reported, but how it's being reported, right? I tell people my journalistic muse for years has been Anderson Cooper on CNN because he can moderate a political panel, right? And 3 days later, he's in Haiti after an earthquake doing field reporting while there's all of this chaos and sadness and everything going around him. And then 2 days after that, he's sitting in studio doing talkbacks with the head of the Department of Energy
Right.
and things like that. So I'm like, wow, okay, he can do all that. I'm going to pattern myself after him. I'm not going to be a one trick pony. I'm going to be able to report, to analyze, to add context, to moderate. That's how I'm going to do it. So those are some things I would suggest, but more than anything, play to your strengths. Like you heard me say, I knew I wasn't good at math at a young age. So I
Yeah.
knew I was not going to have that type of career. So play to your strengths, man. If you've got a charming personality, man, use it. Use it to really, get people to trust you and things like that. I mean, there's all kind of ways, but the more authentic you are as a person and a professional, it will open doors for you. It will get people to vouch for your credibility, and it will just make everything you do easier. If you're trying to talk in a certain radio voice or do
Yeah.
something, people will see through that. Just be
Right.
you, like you guys are doing today. You guys have been fantastic.
Thank you so much. This has been very, very exciting doing this and getting people on, and especially you. I remember when you messaged me back, I was so excited. I think it was like a Sunday. I was like texting Mark. I'm like, Steve Wyche is coming on. We gotta prep now. So thank you again for coming on. We would love to have you on again sometime soon. Once again, Steve Wyche is an NFL Network reporter, and you can follow him on Twitter at Wyche89. And make sure to go and check out his podcast with Jim Trotter called Huddle and Flow. He has some big guests coming on soon. Thank you again, Steve.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.